When we talk about films and TV shows that are culturally significant in the UK, there are films and TV shows that roll off the tongue. Skins, The Inbetweeners, Harry Potter, Love Actually, Wuthering Heights, Pride and Prejudice, Downton Abbey. There are a long list of films and TV shows that are culturally important to the fabric of the UK. One of those that has achieved cult-like status but is still culturally important is 28 Days Later. This doesn't have the same amount of critical or commercial success as a lot of the names on the list. But with that being said, the movie preempts the sort of wave that came about in the late 2000s, early 2010s of zombie movies and TV shows. And I would say that 28 Days Later is key in the formation of that archetype of the heroes or the survivors and the infected and the war between those two. The opening scene of The Walking Dead is a blatant reference to 28 Days Later when we see Cillian Murphy's character wake up in the hospital. So when the follow-up movie came out 28 weeks later, it was not received with the same critical success. It was commercially successful. It was not critically successful. That movie has long since been abandoned in some sense. There has always been this desire to see what a Danny Boyle and Alex Garland follow-up would look like. And we have finally got that in the form of 28 Years Later. And in every department, this film is fucking stupendous. I will start this off by saying that I can almost guarantee that there will be no objectivity or even an attempt at objectivity in this review. I wanted desperately for this film to be as good or as great as it is, because this film was shot and takes place in my region of the UK, which is the Northeast. So the fact that there was a film coming out that was announcing we're shooting this in the northeast, it takes place in the northeast, and goes to the lengths of including some significant northeastern imagery and landmarks that I would not have expected to be included, for the simple reason of there won't be a lot of people, particularly internationally, who are aware of that, and therefore the cultural sensitivity that this movie shows to my region of the world makes me feel as if I can't have a sense of objectivity to this. I'm not necessarily saying that I think this movie is perfect, but I am going to make that abundantly clear that there may be some minor issues that other people in, America or Canada or even further south in the UK maybe won't overlook. I will overlook that in this review because I will mention them, but I think I will make it abundantly clear that to me, they just aren't really affecting my perception of the film itself. I was aware of them, I know that they happened, but beyond that, I don't really care, to be honest. So, to start with the premise of this movie, it takes up after 28 years of the rage virus. The original incarnation of the virus took place, it died out, they moved people back in, and then they attempted to repopulate from London into the rest of the UK. That is where 28 Weeks Later takes place. That attempt to repopulate the UK failed, and it spread to other parts of continental Europe. In the beginning of this film, we are told that NATO, the militaries, and the governments of continental Europe successfully pushed the virus out of Europe and quarantined the UK and successfully isolated the UK from the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. This movie, off the bat, announces, in my opinion, that yes, it is a follow-up to 28 Days Later, but it effectively retcons 28 Weeks Later, and in some sense goes, we don't associate ourselves with that. That movie doesn't exist. What they attempted to do in that film and make this a worldwide thing just doesn't count anymore. We've written it off. Forget that that movie happened. In my opinion, it was a good decision because I don't think 28 Weeks Later is a very good movie. I don't see any reason to add Americans in. I don't see any reason to expand it past the UK. I actually think there's a very unique concept here to say that the rest of the world continued and it is only one country that was affected by this zombie virus, by this rage virus. And that's a very, very powerful idea for me. That's not an idea that is very present in zombie fiction. It tends to be that once the virus takes off, it takes the entire world with it. To begin with, the premise from the very outset of the movie, I was like, this is great. I love this. I love the fact that you're announcing yourself to be a follow-up to 28 Days Later, but you've effectively written off 28 Weeks Later. Then the reintroduction of this world for both people who are aware of the film, who are both aware of what came before, and people who are newcomers to this franchise is excellent. I never felt in the first hour of this film as if I was just being given a rough sort of recap of the previous two films. I just felt like the film and the director and the writer were giving us a chance to become reacclimated to the world that existed in the first two movies, and then going, here's what's new. Here's how the world has evolved or devolved, depending on how you see it, from what came before. And yes, there is a recap here. Yes, there is a need for reasserting the principles of how the infected get infected, what they need to survive, what they feed on, how you kill them. Can they evolve? Are they just one sort of zombie? Is it multiple different types? All of these questions are answered and more. And that first hour is such great fun, followed up by one of the most harrowing hours of film I think has been put to screen this year in the best possible way. But that first hour is so great because the director and the writer, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, respectively, have understood that it's been quite literally almost 28 years since that first movie. So they are going to need to both reintroduce this world and evolve it. If you just attempt to copy what came before, there isn't anything unique to it. There is no need for this movie to exist, and they are both too good of a writer, too good of a director to just simply allow this to be a copycat, a soft sort of reboot of what came before. And it never feels like that. There is an air of style over substance in that first hour, and that isn't a bad thing in my opinion. That is clearly designed, in my opinion, to go, well, we're reintroducing this, but a lot of this is going to be something that is probably familiar to a lot of audiences. The idea of an isolated community that doesn't go out into the rest of the world because there is scary things out there. They don't associate with outsiders. They don't send people out for people who go missing, and the zombies are essentially slowly dying out. These are all ideas that have either existed in other properties or at least concepts that are played with, maybe vaguely in other pieces of media. I would say that The Walking Dead is probably the biggest example of basically just taking every concept of zombie lore. What Danny Boyle then does in his directing is go, I understand that what you're going to be seeing isn't necessarily fresh ideas. So therefore, let me give you fresh ways of showing you these things. The panoramic cameras that stop when a zombie is killed and really show you the impact is such a ridiculously cool idea. And I can't think of any other film that's ever done that. And I just don't understand why. This feels like something that was probably inspired by the Sniper Elite games, where you play as a sniper, and when you kill someone, when you hit someone, it stops and it shows you an x-ray of the enemy's body and where you hit them and how their basically bones have exploded and the entry point, the exit wound, all that sort of stuff. To see this on a big screen, however, just takes that to an entirely new level. It feels like something cinematic where, maybe you've thought, oh, I've seen everything, like, you can't show me anything new. And then I watch this movie and I go, how the fuck have I never thought of that before? The idea of attaching a camera to a zombie that is crawling along the ground because it can't essentially stand up is out of this world, is so great to build danger and fear for our protagonists and to essentially show they are in danger. Here's that sense of danger from the zombies' perspective, from the infected's perspective. There is so much on show that Danny Boyle is almost, in a sense, just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. But it's throwing stuff at a wall with a scalpel rather than a hammer. He's, for lack of a better metaphor, he's kind of like picking up a tomato and then going, this is a good sized tomato. I'm going to use this one. And maybe with something else that was potentially in this movie, he's looking at it and going, I don't like this tomato. It's not ripe enough. It doesn't excite me. And the new stuff, the new techniques that he uses in this film feel exciting. They feel fresh. They feel like things I haven't seen before. And of course, we've seen POV perspectives, dolly cams, things like that. But there is something about this that is just so dynamic and cinematic, and it feels like something that is pushing the boat out, especially in that first hour. There are shots in that first hour that feel ethereal and avant-garde that I would not expect from a film with a $75 million budget that is attempting to re-kickstart a franchise. This is such a stylistic masterpiece, and I'm hoping that Danny Boyle is going to get an Oscar nomination for this. If Ryan Coogler deserves an Oscar nomination for Sinners, which I think he does, then Danny Boyle definitely deserves an Oscar nomination. In my opinion, this is the better movie. And maybe in the future I'll do a video directly comparing both of those, because these are the two best films of the year, in my opinion. This is the best film of the year. And the issues that I had with Sinners were that I didn't feel as if it was consistent in its storytelling, particularly in the last hour of the film. I felt as if it dropped a lot of its storylines, particularly with the female characters, in favour of setting up this sort of action finale. And I had great fun with that ending. But it sacrifices its storytelling, it sacrifices its script, it sacrifices character development. In 28 Years Later, however, what we get is this setup between Aaron Taylor Johnson's Jimmy and Alfie Williams' Spike. This is a father-son relationship, and we get that there is clearly some unease, particularly on the side of Spike. Jimmy is trying his best, but he doesn't always succeed. With that being said, the dynamic here is clearly that Spike wants to live up to what his dad desires for him, which is that he wants him to be a leader in his community. He wants him to be a strong man, a masculine man. But yet Spike feels more in tune with his mother. He doesn't like the fact that his dad lies, and he learns things about him that he feels uncomfortable with, and in turn, he desires to help his mother out of her sickness. What we get in turn is essentially this young character in Spike pushing away from his dad and going, I reject what you're trying to teach me, and I reject some of the things that you seem to do and some of the things that you seem to stand for in favor of what I see from my mother. Whilst I know I have already said that the first hour is style over substance, there is clearly still a relationship here between those two main characters. And in the second hour, the relationship that is explored between Jodie Comer's Isla and Spike feels as if it is drawing a parallel to Spike and Jamie's relationship. Therefore, that requires great performances on all three of those actors, Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Alfie Williams. To start off with Jodie Comer, I wasn't heavily familiar with a lot of her stuff. I know she's heavily praised for Killing Eve. Wasn't really my kind of show, and I'm not a big TV guy anyways, but I knew she was very well respected. She's also a theatre actor, so I knew going into this that she was very good. She does very well to shed her Scouse accent in favour of the northeastern Jodie accent. And you can almost not hear her native accent come through whatsoever. And I will say that both her and Aaron Taylor-Johnson shed those accents pretty much entirely, and they do very well at it. What Jodie Comer does in essentially serving as this sort of acting guide for Alfie Williams is astonishing, in my opinion, because they are the two most emotional characters in this film. And Alfie Williams is only 14, and yet he acts as if he is a seasoned professional. Therefore, in my opinion, a lot of the credit has to come down to both her and Aaron Taylor-Johnson and their efforts to guide him and show him the way in here's how you portray an emotionally mature character on screen and how you convey what you're feeling at all times. This isn't a role that is easily to fulfill, and Alfie Williams does it effortlessly. The emotional intelligence that it requires to portray a character like this is off the charts. It's unbelievably dynamic to show that you are uncomfortable with the things that your adult figures are telling you, and he does it as if he was 10 or 15 years older. And then on the part of Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who I have to be honest, I'm not a major fan of, but with that being said, he's been in two films that, in my opinion, are two of the best films of the year. Nosferatu, and now this. He bears a lot of responsibility for the events that take place in the second and third act of the film, even though he isn't in it very much. But the range of his emotion that we see in the first hour is so interesting as someone who is attempting to be this masculine figure that his son can look up to, but yet is attempting to also be humorous and is attempting to be kind and gentle and not beat his son with a stick without also showing that there is a carrot attached to that stick. But yet the weight of responsibility that he feels because of his son, his wife, and his community bears down on him, and there are misgivings and failures that he is a part of that are his fault and therefore influence the acts of the second and third act. And without ever saying much, we see that weight come through and how he fails or how he sidesteps and missteps in being able to handle it, and to be able to portray that without ever talking about it is unbelievable, in my opinion. And without ever actually having a scene where he discusses what is going on in his mind, I still felt for him as a character. And therefore, in my opinion, from the movies that I have seen of Aaron Taylor-Johnson, I believe that this is probably his best role. And luckily for us, he is set to return in The Bone Temple, which releases in, I believe, about 8-9 months. I also couldn't leave here without giving a very brief mention to Ralph Fiennes, who isn't in the film as much as I would have liked, but he gives one of his sort of archetypal characters in this sort of off-the-wall weirdos who have a point of view on life that is different to those around him. You know, this movie, Conclave, The Menu, even fucking Voldemort in Harry Potter has a weird sort of perspective on life. He's a fucking weirdo, off-the-wall weirdo. I haven't really even talked about the writing very much, but this is going too long, so I'm not going to. But in every department, this movie just absolutely blows me away. The writing, the directing, the acting, the sound design is ridiculous. The inclusion of that song Boots, which I don't know who sang that, but I'm gonna have to find out. It's just outlandishly good. And I'm afraid, particularly because of the movies that are set to come out in the second half of the year, I'm afraid that this movie may not get any nominations at the Oscars whatsoever. And it's not helped that this is pretty much a straight horror movie in some sense. For me personally, and what I care about, this movie is probably going to at least be my top 3. I'm already going to probably go and see it again, and I've only just seen it like 2 days ago. Like I said, I haven't even talked about the writing. I haven't talked about the other influences that I believe are here. The influences of films like Blair Witch on some of the found footage sort of elements of this movie and some of the sort of night vision scenes that we see. I haven't talked about some of the shots that look like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original 1977 one. So because this is running long, to close this out, this movie made me emotional, and I won't discuss why because that is spoiler territory. But part of the reason for that is because we so rarely in the Northeast hear our voices on screen, and it is even rarer, probably even beyond rare, that we hear our voices in successful major blockbusters movies. Therefore, to see a film go to the lengths of including local landmarks like Lindisfarne and Holy Island and the Angel of the North, the Sycamore Gap, all of these cultural touchstones of my area combined with the actual emotional weight of the movie feels like something that is pretty fucking rare in a Hollywood movie, no less. Let's not have any bones about this. This is a great movie. This is a movie that takes its time. This is a movie that is culturally sensitive. And it's a movie that's emotional. And to have a movie that is set here, that takes its time to really learn the area and to have a love and a passion for that area and put it on show in a way that feels like it is coming from someone who has lived and breathed this area for their entire life just feels like something that never happens here.